Have you ever walked through a place where the air feels heavy, as though the past itself is watching you from the shadows? The Tower of London, with its towering stone walls and centuries of blood-soaked history, is one such place, a fortress where the ghosts of the executed and imprisoned still roam. This ancient landmark has witnessed countless horrors, from the tragic deaths of young princes to the beheading of queens. But the tower's dark legacy isn't just confined to history books. Its haunted halls and eerie corridors continue to stir the dead, making it one of the most terrifying spots in the world. Visitors speak of strange noises echoing through empty chambers, of ghostly figures drifting silently through the mist, and of whispers that chill the soul. Guards and tourists alike have felt the cold touch of unseen hands and seen faces from long dead centuries staring back at them. The Tower of London isn't just a monument to the past, it's a living, breathing relic where history and the supernatural collide. Step inside if you dare, but be warned, once you enter the tower, you may never feel truly alone again.
The Tower of London has always been a place of fascination, a looming structure steeped in history and blood. Its thick stone walls hold stories from centuries past, from royal executions to tales of betrayal. But there are whispers strange, soft whispers that curl through the corridors in the dead of night, chilling the bones of even the most hardened guards. For some, these are just stories, but for those who know the tower best, the ghosts are very real. In the 1920s, the tower was no longer used as a prison, but it was still a place where history lived and breathed. It was also home to a small group of guards who patrolled its grounds, keeping the curious tourists at bay. One such guard, William Fenton, had heard the rumors. He had laughed them off. Of course, stories of headless queens and ghostly soldiers sounded ridiculous. But on one cold November night, as the moon hung low in the sky, William found himself alone in the White Tower, and the laughter died in his throat. It started with footsteps, heavy, deliberate, like the tread of someone wearing boots far older than any William had seen. He spun around, his lantern flickering, casting long shadows on the stone walls. No one was there. But the footsteps continued, echoing through the silence, growing louder with each passing second. William's heart raced, sweat slicking his palms. He forced himself to move forward, calling out, "Who's there?" But his voice seemed swallowed by the dark. The footsteps stopped suddenly, and all that remained was an eerie silence. William stood frozen, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on him. Then, faintly, a whisper reached his ear, a woman's voice, soft and sad, speaking words he couldn't quite understand. His blood turned to ice. He knew the stories well enough to guess who it might be. Anne Boleyn, the executed queen, who was said to walk the Tower Green at night, her head tucked beneath her arm. Anne Boleyn's death was one of the most infamous in English history. The second wife of King Henry VIII, she had been accused of treason, adultery, and witchcraft. In May of 1536, she was beheaded within the tower's walls, her execution swift and brutal. But her spirit never seemed to leave. For years, guards and visitors had claimed to see her ghost wandering the Tower Green, headless but unmistakable in her royal gown. In the 1920s, there were even more frequent sightings of the headless queen. Guards would often speak in hushed tones about Anne's ghost, their eyes wide with fear. Some had seen her moving silently through the corridors at night, her pale figure glowing faintly in the darkness. Others heard her weeping, a mournful sound that echoed through the tower as if the very stones remembered her tragic end. But for William, the encounter with her spirit was far more personal. One night, weeks after his first unsettling experience, he was stationed near the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, where Anne's remains were buried. The night was unnaturally still, the air thick with a strange tension. As the hours dragged on, William began to feel as though he wasn't alone. A cold breeze swept through the corridor, though no windows were open. Then, in the distance, he saw her. A figure in a white gown, her form almost transparent, drifting slowly toward him, his breath caught in his throat. She was beautiful, even in death, though her face was sad, and her hands clutched her severed head close to her chest. William wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't move. The ghost of Anne Boleyn stopped just a few feet from him, her dark eyes locking onto his. There was no anger in her gaze, only sorrow. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. In a flash, she was gone. After his first encounter with Anne Boleyn's ghost, William couldn't shake the sense of dread that hung over him every time he patrolled the Tower of London. The air always felt too thick, the shadows too deep. He tried to convince himself it had been a hallucination, but deep down, he knew what he had seen was real. Other guards had begun to whisper about his pale face and nervous demeanor, but William refused to share the truth. He knew the Tower's dead were not at rest, and he feared they were not done with him yet. One foggy night, weeks after the first encounter, William was patrolling near the Tower Green. The heavy mist rolled in like a ghost itself, and the familiar weight of dread settled over him. He knew, somehow, that Anne Boleyn was near. A sudden rustling caught his ear, and as he turned, she appeared again, her figure glowing faintly through the fog. This time, she didn't vanish. Instead, Anne moved slowly toward him, her head tucked under her arm, her eyes filled with a deep, sorrowful longing. William stood frozen, his heart racing. He expected her to fade as she had before, but this time was different. As she approached, her lips parted, and a single word escaped her. "Help me." Her voice wasn't angry, nor vengeful, but filled with a desperate plea. William wanted to help, but he didn't know how. He could only watch as her ghost began to blur, melting into the fog until there was nothing left but the cold night air. After that encounter, William knew he couldn't stay. He resigned from his post, unable to bear another night surrounded by the dead. The weight of Anne's plea haunted him. He realized that the ghosts of the tower were not there to frighten, they were trapped in their own agony, prisoners of their tragic past. Anne, the princes, and countless others weren't haunting the tower for revenge. They were seeking release, a freedom they could never seem to find. As William walked away from the tower for the last time, he glanced back at the towering walls. The ghosts within were forever part of the tower's history, bound to its stones, their restless spirits whispering in the shadows. The Tower of London wasn't just haunted, it was a prison for souls, where the dead waited for someone to finally set them free.